Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar on Writing Up a Storm for ASCILITE 2014. I'm Alan Soong, the facilitator for this webinar session, and currently serving as part of the ASCILITE executive and organizing this series of ASCILITE webinars this year. This afternoon, we are very glad to have Dr. Jenny McDonald to share her insights on how to prepare for a good conference paper. Jenny is a co-convener for the 2014 ASCILITE conference. She is a lecturer based in the Student Learning Center at the University of Otago, and her professional and research interests include educational technology development, student use of technology, tutorial dialogue and feedback, automated assessment, and tutorial systems. For this afternoon's 1-hour webinar, Dr. McDonald will share first for the first 30 minutes, and the remaining time will be open for a question and answer session. Now, during the Q&A session, you could either post your questions in the chat box or click onto the hand-raising button located on the left, right below the image box, and I'll give you the right to speak. And when speaking, you can click onto the talk button, and after speaking, you can release the talk button. So without further ado, please help me to welcome Dr. Jenny McDonald. Jenny, please.
Hello, Alan. Hello, everyone. Thanks for that introduction. So we're going to be talking about preparing a good conference paper. Along with Bronwyn Hegarty, I'm the co-convener, as Alan said, for ASCILITE 2014. And many of you, I think, will have seen that Bronwyn actually was going to give this webinar. Unfortunately, she was called away at very short notice, so you've got me instead. But I'll do my best to facilitate our discussion about what makes a good conference paper over the next hour or so. All right, Alan's already given you a little bit of background about me, and I've just popped up some of the things that I'm interested in on the slide in terms of teaching and research, just trying to specify in a few words what my teaching and research interests are. Now, the reason that I've done this, apart from just general introduction, is because the first goal of the session today is to know, or to try to get to understand who our papers are aimed towards. And of course, when you're writing a paper for the ASCILITE conference, you're directing it towards, in fact, all of us. We're all part of the ASCILITE community. So what I'm going to ask you to do in a few moments is to describe your own teaching and or research interests, just in a few words, and share them with the rest of us. We'll come back to that, and that's really so that we can all get an idea of the kinds of people who are involved in the ASCILITE community. The second goal for this session is to get to grips with how we can focus and situate the writing that we do, come to understand the importance of the abstract. We'll have a look at an existing abstract, and we'll have a go at critiquing it or editing it. We'll revisit some of the elements of structure and style, and these are things that everyone here will be familiar with, but we're just going to just touch base on some of those again. And we'll, towards the end of this presentation, we'll just spend a moment or two thinking about the importance of the end, or concluding your conference paper. Hopefully along the way we'll be able to gather up some handy resources that will help us to develop our own conference papers for ASCILITE this year. And this is probably a useful time to remind all of you that the deadline for submissions for ASCILITE 2014 is the 30th of June. So there's about another 2 or 3 weeks or so for you to get cracking on your papers for ASCILITE. All right, so as I say, the way I'd like to start is for all of you to perhaps describe on the whiteboard who you are. Now you'll notice down the left hand side there's a little text tool there. If you click on that and pop your mouse on the whiteboard, you'll find that you're able to enter some text. I'm just going to have a go at that here myself. There we go. Text. Like this. So we'll just spend a couple of minutes and see if you can all introduce yourselves. Introduce either your teaching or your research or both in just a few words on the whiteboard. Let's see how we go with that. Good stuff. Thanks, Mark. You're kicking us off. And Adrian Moore. Lovely, from Auckland University. So we've got mobile learning research, got a design teacher from Mark, Helen from Charles Darwin, Okay, so Helen's looking for some good writing tips. We've got Lisa, an educational developer. From the University of New England. Great. Well, it's lovely to see the diversity of roles and geography. That's great. Hello, Vandana. So you're a tutor. We've got James from Bond University, an EdTech researcher. That's lovely. Just give another minute or so if anybody else would like to add anything to the board. All right, there's a group entry there. That's great. And a welcome too to those of you just joining the session. Right, I'm going to press on at this point. Thanks to all of you who added your notes to the board. As I say, it's good to see the diversity of roles that people have popped up there, and hopefully this will give us some idea of the kinds of people who are involved in the ASCILITE community or who are joining the ASCILITE community. So, as a community, what do we expect of ourselves and each other when we're contributing papers to a conference like ASCILITE? Now, this might be self-evident, but it's something that's often not done, and that is a really good way to get to grips with what kind of, how you can approach writing a paper is to actually look at existing papers for a particular venue. So what I've done on the slide is pop up the link to all the ASCILITE proceedings. So the first link is to the ASCILITE proceedings for, I think, at least the last dozen or so years. And Alan's very kindly pasted these links into the chat box. And what that means is that you can basically use your mouse and click on the link and go straight to the web page where those proceedings are. I've also provided 3 links to some past ASCILITE best papers, and the 3 that I've pulled out are from ASCILITE 2010, and the main reason I've pulled out those ones is, in fact, they were the easiest best papers to find quickly. But every year the ASCILITE conference does give an ASCILITE award or a series of awards for best papers. The 3 I've got there, one is from Shane Dawson, who is, of course, one of our invited speakers this year. One from Grace Lynch, who will be known to those of you who work in the area of analytics. And last but not least, an outstanding paper from Tom Reeves, who I think was actually won the absolute best paper in 2010. They're all worth a read, and they're really good examples of what it takes to produce an outstanding paper for ASCILITE. So those links are there, and I really recommend that as a first step towards writing your own paper for ASCILITE, you have a look first perhaps at the best papers and then browsing through the ASCILITE proceedings from past years. Perhaps the most important question you can ask yourself is, so what? Here I've provided a pointer to an editorial that Neil Selwyn wrote earlier this year for Learning Media and Technology, and Neil Selwyn's the editor, I think, of that journal. And it's really the question that says, well, you know, why should I read this article? It's saying to your audience, well, you know, why should I bother to pick this up and read it? What have you got to say that matters to me? And again, Alan has just popped into the chat box the web link or the URL to Neil's article. I'm just going to pick out a couple of things that Neil points out in the editorial that I think are really of relevance for us in ASCILITE. So one of the things that he talks about is an issue where academic research can become conflated with the more practical focus of evaluation. So I guess as teachers, as educators, we're all concerned with the daily business of evaluating what we do, and those of us in the EdTech area are often involved in evaluations of educational technology. But the point that Selwyn makes is it's okay to write up an evaluation, but if you're going to present it as a conference paper or a journal paper, you really need to be locating it or situating that evaluation in a broader context. What can that specific case tell us about some broader issues? What makes it relevant to others working in the field? So I think he draws out that discussion nicely in the article. And finally, I just I guess point you to 4 key strands that he identifies to the question of so what. So the first is, so what is the relevance of your article to educational practice? What's the relevance of your article to policy? What's the relevance to academic research or the writing of others? And finally, what's the relevance of your article to theory? Now, of course, your article doesn't have to be relevant to all of those things, but it should probably be relevant to at least one of those. And as part of your article, you should be able to draw the reader's attention to that general strand. One of the other points that Selwyn makes in the article, in his editorial, is that when you're writing an article, it's often easy to lose sight of how it will look to the outside world, and I think that's something that it's worth remembering for all of us. And of course, Neil Selwyn wasn't the first person to have said this. In fact, Pooh-Bear in 1928 said a very similar thing. A thing which seems very thingish inside you is altogether different when it gets out and has other people looking at it. The moral of the story here is, whatever your so what, it's always worth getting other people to look at it. Toss around your ideas. A very worthwhile thing. And before we leave the so what of the conference paper, don't worry if what you have to say is only a very small thing. That is the case for the vast majority of us. Even if our so what is small, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's unimportant. The key thing is that what you have to say is relevant to your readership, to the wider audience, and in our case, of course, to the wider ASCILITE audience. Moving on now to the idea of the abstract. Thompson and Kamler, Pat Thompson and Barbara Kamler, who I think was at Deakin, or may still be in Melbourne, and some of you may know Barbara, have written an excellent book called Writing for Peer-Reviewed Journals, Strategies for Getting Published. I really recommend this as it's a fairly small book, but it's a very valuable one. I recommend it as a good place to start if you're looking for guidance about writing a conference paper. One of the concepts that Thompson and Kamler come up with is in the book is a thing called tiny text, and tiny text is the name they give to the abstract simply because it is in fact very short. But they point out that writing the abstract, or this tiny bit of text, is a generative act. In other words, you write it, you analyze, you write it again, you analyze it, you rewrite it, and so on. And they point out that writers are always in process, never arrived, finished, and polished. They talk about the abstract as having 4 moves, and what I'm going to do is just discuss these in a little bit more detail here. So the first move, or the first thing, if you like, that the abstract needs to do is to locate your paper. What's the context of your paper? Where does it sit in the wider discourse of the community and the field in general? You might name some of the larger issues and debates and point out their significance. The next move is focus. What's the focus sitting in this broader context of your paper? What's your point? Which particular piece of the broader issues are you going to be focusing on here? The report part of the abstract very briefly reports on perhaps a little bit about what you did, but mostly focuses on your findings. And finally, the argue move. Well, the argue is really about going beyond your specific argument or your point and what you discovered to extending it and saying, well, this is why it matters. This, in fact, is the so what, and it returns your paper back to its location in the broader context. Now, hopefully some of these ideas will become a little bit clearer as we move through. Thompson and Kamler are also point out in the book that there's, you're not just restricted to these 4 moves. If your paper is perhaps more empirical, perhaps it's a quasi-experimental study or something like that, you might extend your 4 moves out to 5 to include this anchor point. And all the anchor point is, or the anchor move, is simply spending a little bit more time on the method of your paper. If, on the other hand, you're writing a more theoretical paper, then your 4 moves might be reduced to 3, where you simply locate or set the context for your paper, and then you do what they call problematize, which is really simply identifying one or more issues from your context and describing that in a little more detail before, in your argument, going on to perhaps offer some further discussion or solutions or alternatives to the problems you've identified. All right, so that's some descriptions from me. Let's have a look at a tiny text. Now, here's one that I feel able to use because it's one of mine. This is an abstract from a paper that I had at ASCILITE, at the ASCILITE conference, in fact, last year. Again, there's a link to the full paper that Alan will pop in the box shortly if you're interested to have a look at that, but it's not important for this exercise. What I'd like us to do is, as a group, see if we can, well, I guess improve this abstract, and I'm sure that's possible, but perhaps as a first step, see if we can identify the moves that Thompson and Kemmler talk about in this abstract. So again, I'm going to ask you to use the whiteboard. I'm just going to advance the slide so that now you're on the whiteboard. You should just be looking at the text itself of this abstract for one of my papers. And don't worry about offending me. Feel free to have a read of the text and then see if you can use the pen or a marker from the whiteboard to identify the context, or to first of all identify the context, the locate move for this abstract. I'll give you a few moments to have a think about that, and then perhaps see if you can identify the location for this abstract, or how this abstract is located. Okay, lovely. So somebody's highlighted context. Yep, so the classroom context is one. Any other advanced? That's not the only context. Yeah, great. Okay. And the focus. All right, maybe perhaps pick a different color, or perhaps even feel free to add some text onto the whiteboard to identify the focus. Is it there? Is it clear? Yeah, okay, so somebody in pink has picked up on the focus is the design and implementation of a new system. All right. And finally, the argument. Do I actually make a point? Is it clear in this text? If you'd like to make some comments in the chat box at this point, feel free to. It's kind of getting a little messy on the slide, so do feel free to type your thoughts and your feedback into the chat box as well. Yeah, okay, so describe some results. And certainly it was an evaluation study, that's right. Okay, So I guess I'm going to ask a question now. Does this abstract follow the 4 moves that Thompson and Kamler suggest? And is that helpful? Do you think these moves are useful? Do they help you to think about and frame the abstract? Okay, thanks to those of you who are typing into the text box. Okay. All right. Well, I guess, yeah, thanks, Adrian. The argument is not one way. No, the argument absolutely isn't necessarily one way at all. I guess one of the things that interests me about the way Thompson and Kamler present this framework is that actually it evolves nicely into a broader framework for the paper as a whole. So one of the things they recommend is when you're writing a paper to actually begin with the abstract. Many of us, and I would put myself into this category, tend to leave the abstract until last. You've written everything else and then you do the abstract. But in actual fact, thinking about the abstract first and doing that writing and rewriting and honing down, getting down to the core elements of the paper that you're going to be producing is incredibly helpful to give you a guide for what you need to slot in to the remainder of the paper. That leads us on to the issue of the broader structure of the paper, if you like. So that's it. From the abstract, you can grow your paper. So here on this slide, I've just filled in a little more of the detail for each of those points. So again, it's all about introduce the context. What are the questions arising from the context? What did we do? What did we find? And why does this matter? And where do we go from here? And there's some minor variations depending on whether you're looking at a more theoretical topic or a more empirical topic. Okay. Let's move on now to talk about style. And here I'm going to point you to another resource. Now this resource has been around for a very long time, and I'm sure that some of you will need no introduction to the elements of style by Strunk and White. It's one of my favorites, and I do keep a copy at hand at all times. Really recommend it. It's a very readable little book, apart from anything else. There's a lovely passage that I've quoted there that resonates with me. Writers will often find themselves steering by stars that are disturbingly in motion, and I could certainly relate to that. One of the most useful parts of the book for conference paper writers like ourselves is Chapter 5, which provides some hints on an approach to style. Now I've just picked out a few of them there and highlighted them. Use words and phrases that come readily, start from a rough scheme or design. Write with nouns and verbs. And I love this particular quote: the adjective hasn't been built that can pull a weak or inaccurate noun out of a tight place. And that's kind of indicative of the language throughout this book. And I can see from the comments in the chat that some of you have similarly found it to be a helpful book. Some other hints there: avoiding qualifiers, avoiding fancy words or explain them, prefer the standard to the offbeat. All these things apply equally to a conference paper. Oh great, Mark's just popped up an online version of the elements of style right there. That's lovely. In addition to talking about style, for those of you who like me, sometimes struggle with rules of grammar or usage. There are also very helpful chapters on the elementary rules of usage, principles of composition, and so on. It's a great guide. Okay, finally we come to how do you end your paper. As Thompson and Kamler point out, the ending is incredibly difficult to write. And as they say, there seems to be no scholarly equivalent to Charlotte Bronte's "Reader, I Married Him." If anyone finds that scholarly equivalent, do let us know. But essentially, what you should be saying at the end is really what you've said, or what we've said. You locate your argument, you find the focus, describe your findings, and say why all of this matters. Make the final link back to the argument you're making and the context of your discussion. That's pretty much the end of the talk side of this webinar that I wanted to say. One thing I haven't really discussed is the title, and perhaps that's something that we can talk about in a more informal setting if you'd like to. But other than that, I think very happy to take questions, and also happy to take any specific questions you may have about submitting papers for ASCILITE 2014. So yeah, I'm happy to
thanks very much, Jenny.
Take any questions?
There are two questions there.
All right, so what have we got here? All right. All right, so should we include references in our abstracts? Okay, so I'll answer that question first. There is no opportunity when you're submitting to the ASCILITE conference to simply submit an abstract. You either submit a short paper or a concise paper, or submit a full paper, and absolutely references are required in both of those. So unlike some other conferences where you can simply submit an abstract, and often those sorts of conferences do require some references, for ASCILITE all our submissions are either a short paper, a concise paper, or a full paper. So hopefully that answers that question. And the second one, when Strunk says he prefers the standard to the offbeat, yes, he is asking us to use the standard. Use terms that people generally are likely to understand. If you go offbeat or use technical terms or specific acronyms, usually it's really helpful to explain them. I see Oriel notes I only have 150 words in my abstract. Now Oriel's caught me on the hop, and I cannot remember how many words we're supposed to have in an ASCILITE abstract. Perhaps Oriel, you could type that into the chat box. 150. Oh, look at that! So I was spot on. Thanks, Kim, as well. So there we go. It is a 150-word abstract. Okay. What about submitting discussion and links to work to be discussed? Okay, so Mark's asked that question, and the answer to that is, in addition to concise papers and full papers, there is an opportunity to submit another kind of offering this year, which is called the shared practice stream, and that stream is ideal where you want to talk about something that you do in practice. You've got some links and some ideas that you think would make a good discussion session. So I'd encourage you there to have a look at the shared practice stream for that. All right. We've got with us Swee Kin Loke, who is my colleague on the ASCILITE 2014 Program Committee, and Kin has just shared with us the link to the sharing practice stream. In fact, the link to all the different kinds of submissions that you can make. So do have a look at that link and see the different options that you can use. Okay, have I missed anyone's questions or comments? Okay. Okay, so one of the other things Mark was mentioning was when you submit links in work to be discussed, sometimes that can give away the identity. Yeah, that's a tricky one. I mean, when you're doing your submission, certainly do try to remove any you know, features that will obviously identify you. Yes, Mark, you're right. Sometimes links can give it away. We are part of a community. You're never going to get that 100%. But when you submit your papers, you do submit them without indicating which institutions you're from. And if you refer to your institution in the text of the paper, do ensure that you take out the name of the institution in the body of the text. And you know, when you finalize your paper after the review process, that's the point at which you pop those details back in. I think if you think that a link may identify you, may be unfair, again, you could remove that from your submitted paper and simply put link to be provided. I think that would be okay as well. Okay, how long does the review process take? So we're hoping to have well, first off, the submissions for papers close on the 30th of June, and we will anticipate having all the reviews completed, I'm pretty sure, by the end of August. But Kim has popped up there the key ASCILITE dates. So click on that link to get the definitive answer to all the key dates, including when reviews are completed. And we send out the advice to authors. Certainly we will be sending out advice to authors in plenty of time, so that you can still take advantage of the early bird registration rates. All right, and thanks, Ken, again. So the acceptance advice is the 10th of August. That's what we're aiming for, and we'll certainly be doing our best to meet that. And yep, as Alan just pointed out, this session is being recorded and will be shared as well, so you'll be able to go back and refer to this and to the slides if you wish. Are there any other questions or issues? So one question coming up. Any possibility of the deadline being extended? It's always possible. We won't be likely making a decision on that much before the week or so prior to the 30th of June. But do keep an eye on the website. If we do provide an extension, certainly we'll be publicising that widely. We'd like to stick to the 30th if we possibly can at this stage. Okay. All right, so Oriel's asking if we've had many submissions in. At the moment we've got I guess a steady trickle of submissions coming in. I've noticed an increase over the last few days. Kin, has been monitoring our submissions. Do you have any comments there, Kin? Okay, so we've had 15 workshops, 2 full papers, and I think there was a small number of short papers as well. Perhaps I was making that up, and perhaps a poster or 2 had come in. That's the other category, by the way, of submission, is a poster, 1 poster. All right, I must have been imagining the short papers. 3 sharing practice sessions. Okay, that's a question from Mark in terms of the percentage of acceptance. I might hand that one actually over to Alan. Alan, do you have a sense of that from the ASCILITE exec? Who would have the overview in terms of past conferences?
The percentage of acceptance varies from one year to the other, and I think at this point in time, we can't say much in terms of from one conference to the other. So it really varies from one to the other. Yeah.
Okay. One thing I can say with confidence is that papers do certainly get rejected for ASCILITE. And I can say that with confidence because I had a paper rejected, I think, fairly early on in the piece when I first started writing for ASCILITE. And actually I'll share with you the reasons why, because I think that's useful too. So I think, again, I was floundering greatly with my first ever submission to ASCILITE with the so what. My point wasn't clear in the first paper I submitted. And the other thing that I did was I think really didn't follow Professor Strunk's advice of preferring the standard to the offbeat. So I engaged in a little bit of flowery rhetoric, and I recall describing one particular passage in that rejected paper was I talked about learning objects, and many of you will be familiar with learning objects. They're sort of less popular these days, but at the time they were all the rage. And I talked about learning objects clumping like moss on the doorstep, and that really upset one reviewer. So there you go. That's perhaps a cautionary tale. Oh, lovely. Now somebody has fished out. Ken, thank you, has fished out the rejection rate from last year. So there you go. Just the full paper, 64 submitted and 47 accepted, 17 rejected. So there you go. Lovely. Thanks, Ken, and thanks for that question. So yeah, it's definitely not a done deal at all by putting a paper into ASCILITE. It's a very worthwhile process to go through, and certainly from the program committee end, we will be encouraging all reviewers to provide detailed and useful feedback. So for new paper writers, this is a great process to go through, and certainly great preparation for going on to develop articles for journals and other conferences as well. All right, so Oriel's made the point about titles. Titles can be a bit more offbeat, and again, one thing there, I mean, if you've got a good paper and a good abstract, a slightly wobbly title is not going to, you know, send your paper off the rails. Conversely, a great title but a less strong abstract and a wobbly paper is not such a good thing. So try not to agonize too much over your title. One, I think, useful caveat with titles is, remember these days, one of the things you want to happen is you want your paper to be accessible. You want other people to find it. And the more you use words in your title that are kind of directly relevant to the paper and what you're talking about, the more likely it is that your paper will be found by the very audience that you're talking to. So, yep, a sharp title can be very effective, but just bear in mind again, think about your audience, think about what they're looking for. Yeah. And see Mark and Ken having a wee discussion there in the chat about you know, engaging in peer review before submitting. Absolutely, the more you can toss ideas around before you bring them in, or before you submit your paper, the better it will be. All right, and again, thanks, Oriel's raised the issue of the theme of the conference, reflecting that in the conference paper. Again, absolutely, and that is about, you know, I guess the place to deal with that, again, is it's in your location, where you're locating your paper, and you're locating it as part of a contribution to the ASCILITE conference. The theme this year is about rhetoric and reality. Where does your paper sit on that? I guess when we were tossing the idea of rhetoric and reality around among the conference committee, we thought of it not as just two you know, two discrete opposites. We thought of rhetoric and reality very much as a continuum. Where does your paper sit on that continuum, and make reference to that? Absolutely. All right. Alan, do you have anything further to add from the ASCILITE exec side? So any advice? Okay, thanks for that. Any advice when receiving feedback from reviewers? I guess the main advice that I would give is absolutely don't take it personally. The reviewers are there to comment on your work. They're not there to comment on you. And sometimes reading comments about our work can be difficult to hear, but usually it's very, very valuable. And again, it's about taking the reviewer's comment as, I guess, putting yourself in their seat and thinking about them as the reader. Ultimately, when we write, we're writing for our readers. So what the review process helps us to do, I think, is to have the opportunity to sit in the reader's seat. So definitely don't take it personally, and do try to respond to the reviewer's comments. And see, throwing things is good. Indeed, throw things first, and then go back to the reviewer's comments. Most reviewers are very encouraging. I've certainly found and been very grateful to many ASCILITE reviewers over the years. All right, so just a few minutes left. Any closing comments do have a feel for the number of presenters we want this year? I think the short answer to that is no. What we'd like this year is as many high quality submissions as we possibly can to keep us very busy over the next few months. We certainly want to do our best to ensure that we have some outstanding presentations at ASCILITE this year. And yeah, absolutely quality, not quantity. And certainly the conference is what all of us will make it. So yeah. Okay, for those of us here, okay, so that's from Mark. Now Mark is at Otago. Mark, absolutely, I think we could set up a local meetup, and perhaps we could talk about that offline after this. From Amy, is asking a question there about Strunk. Will the style recommended by Strunk be relevant to this day? I guess, I mean, to me, having very recently just gone through Strunk's chapter again and revisited it with great joy, I would say yes. I think certainly the book, the most recent edition is 2000, and I think they have weeded out largely any sort of kind of fusty old-fashioned ideas that perhaps may be less relevant. Certainly, my personal view is there's much in the book that is still relevant to this day, yes.
Any other questions?
Okay, thanks Amy, thanks for the question. Any final comments, thoughts, or questions? We are doing our best to keep the ASCILITE website up to date, and also do remember you can follow us on Twitter as well. All right. Thank you all for coming and taking part. Really appreciate it.
If you have any other questions, please feel free to stay back for a while. At this point in time, we just want to thank Jenny as well as Sikin for sharing with us this morning. And we hope that you have found this session useful, and we will keep you informed about the webinar schedule in the coming weeks. And we hope to see you at the next ASCILITE webinar. So thank you once again, and I hope to see you again. I'll probably stay for a few minutes, yeah.